But the primary purpose of this series is really to get some of our experienced lawyers who've been on that journey, professional and personal, to share their insights with you. And equally importantly, this is your session, Next Generation Lawyers. So once David has had his moment in the spotlight, please turn that spotlight back on him, particularly you, Azim, and ask the things that you really want to know about your career path and your journey. Pick up on the points he makes and focus on those things. So, because that's where the value will come, and continuing to log into these mentor series, the USA Next Generation, or the North America's Next Generation meeting that we're doing next week, and in September when we have a global Next Generation forum. This is when we're really going to be able to come together and start building a network virtually, so that at some point in the future we can build it for real. So without further ado, David Ettinger, chair of Mackrell International, partner at Keller and Heckman, displaced from Washington, D.C. to Shanghai. Tell us about your legal journey.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Keith. And as Greg said at the top of the call before most were even on the line, we can't thank you enough for everything that you're doing and Nigel has done over the years, particularly during this difficult time. I think we're all sort of getting used to the Zoom calls, but that doesn't make it any easier. And you've managed to keep Mackrell front and center with not only the folks who typically go to the meetings, but arguably like never before, well beyond those individuals. So there's a silver lining to COVID, and you managed to take a crisis and make a positive experience and a positive opportunity from it. So thank you, Keith. I know everyone who's worked with you is in agreement on that. I also want to first and foremost thank everybody for joining the call, and even more importantly than that, to wish you and your families much health and safety during this difficult time, and to thank you for continuing to think about Mackrell even during these difficult times. So I've been asked to kick off this mentor series, and I'm really excited. Keith asked me about a month ago to do it. So for the first 3 weeks, I thought, what am I going to say? And then in normal fashion for me, when I prepare for something, I sort of have a notepad to the side and I start jotting things down as they come to me in odd places, odd times. So I'm excited to at least share some of my experiences with you. What I've decided to do is kind of break this down to three different segments. The first is, and I'll spend less time on this, talking a little bit about my background and where I started and why I'm in Shanghai, sitting in Shanghai right now, still speaking after 8 years, fairly poor Mandarin. I'll hit on that briefly. Then, of course, I'm going to talk about my experience with Mackrell and how I think you can maximize your experience. I've said this many times, so let me say it again. Professionally, Mackrell was the most important, most significant opportunity and experience to date. And I've been doing it, as you'll hear in a minute, since about 2006. So about 14 years actively involved in the network. And then I'm going to get into probably what's most of interest, which is some of my career thoughts, some of the things that worked for me, some of the things that I didn't realize I was doing or realized I should be doing until many, many years practicing law. And so I think the advantage, I have no advantage over anyone on this call. In fact, I see faces like Greg Bergman and Nigel Rowley who easily could do this even better than me. But what I think is important, and I'm going to touch on this even again later, is that I can share some of my experiences so that you can take as much or as little from it as you want. Because I did the same for my mentors. And so that's why I think this is a great forum. So let's get to it. Very quickly, who am I? I know most of the names on the screen, but I am David Ettinger. I am a member of the law firm Keller and Heckman. We are based in Washington, D.C. Our firm has been a member of the network since about the year 2000. And I was not the original delegate. Jack Richards, who has since retired, was kind enough to bring me into the network. And I'll tell you a very quick story in a minute as to how that happened, because it may be very relevant to how each of you can get more involved in the network. But I've been practicing law for 28 years, did the math this morning, and I've been with the same law firm for 20 years. So I sort of think that's somewhat unique in today's age, being with the same firm for 20 years, and I'm going to touch on that too. My area of expertise, if you will, is food safety, consumer products. Do a lot of work with Azim, who you see on the screen now, in the world of e-cigarettes and tobacco-related products. But by and large, I work in the FDA practice group. And I've been fortunate enough to work on 3 different continents. Started in DC office, moved to the Brussels office. And for the last 8 years, maybe they just got tired of me. They shipped me out to our office here in Shanghai. And I've been here since 2012. So let me start off with my greatest accomplishment and then move on and get that out of the way. And I don't want to sound or cliche, but by far my greatest accomplishment is raising my 3 children. I've got 3 kids, 7, Jamie, Dylan, 17, 14, and almost 13. And for sure, this is the most important part of my life. And I add that not just to kind of boast their names when I can. And those of you who know me know that I like to talk about my children because I'm so proud of them. But it also is, still you can't hear me.
I can hear you, but it's a little bit flaky.
Okay. If I talk slower, probably won't fix it, but let me.
You're back.
I'm back. Okay. So I mentioned my kids only because I think that's an important aspect of my professional career, to have that balance. And hopefully each of you have, whether it's children or just obviously your own family, it's important to have that balance. I think that goes without saying, but it makes career much more so I'm in Shanghai since 2012. And I've been in, how did I get involved in network? Let me at least spend a minute on that. An email went around my office. Can you hear me okay, Keith? Thumbs up. You can hear me? Good. In 2005, an email went on the office. One of the team partners, Jack Richards, who at that time was talking about this Mackrell network. And like all of you, for the first time, I heard that name. I thought he was talking about some dinner he had the night before. And then when I started to read about this network, having a great interest in international law, I was very intrigued by it. And I asked a lot of questions about the network. And I immediately became interested and wanted to know more about it. But what happened was I was on a business trip in Mexico as an associate, and I'm going to tell you a little bit later about my strategy about getting some, what I would call, important speaking opportunities in different parts of the world, and how you can do that. As an associate, I did that, and in 2005 or 6 it was, I was in Mexico City, and I had remembered about this Mackrell network, and Jack had said at the time, if you're ever in a city where there's a Mackrell member, reach out. So here I was, you know, maybe an 8th year associate, 9th year associate, and I did just that. I had the afternoon off, and I reached out to the member, and without exaggeration, 1 hour after sending the email to Jorge Cervantes of the Mexico City firm, I was sitting in his office talking about different aspects of what he does. He was kind enough to give me my kids. Time to be me. Not good.
Again, it's back. What I'm going to ask is, it's lovely to see you all, but if everyone apart from David and me, so I can communicate with David, if you could turn your video off for
That would
now,
help.
that might just help with the bandwidth, and we'll give that a try, and then we'll turn video back on when we ask David questions at the end.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tell me, how is this connection? Any better?
Yeah, that's good.
I'll keep going and raise your hand if you. Anyway, I don't want to drag too on about this, but it was a wonderful experience, and it was just a short 2 or 3 hour meeting. But what happened was Jack at that time was very happy that I had taken that initiative. And if you fast forward a year later, when I was working out of our Brussels office, I was in Berlin. Wow. You think it's my connection, Keith? Keep going.
Yeah, keep it just bounces in and out.
Okay. So Jack could not attend the meeting in Berlin. Long story short, he sent me because he remembered that I had taken some interest in the network. And that's when I walked into the meeting in Berlin in 2007 and met gentlemen like Nigel and Doug Burns and many others. And that was how I got pulled in. If any of you have attended a Mackrell event, you will immediately understand when I say pulled in, because when you meet the individuals in this network, it's very addictive, and it's easy to find a place for yourself. And so, how can you maximize Mackrell International? What does it do for you? I am assuming that since you're on this call, you have some understanding of what Mackrell is about. I'm also assuming that you have an interest in growing within the network now as young lawyers. But as we all know, there's going to be people who move on, retire, and we're always looking for younger lawyers to fill those shoes. And so the fact that you're on the call suggests that you are interested in doing that. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but what can you do to maximize your experience with Mackrell? Well, I've already touched on one. You should know where all of the Mackrell members are. You should know where the cities are. And you should make an effort, whether you are traveling on business or whether you're traveling for pleasure, to either call up, stop by, have lunch, and get to know those members. Now, obviously, we're in a very different age where travel is restricted, but we all assume that will end. And so at that time, I want you to all think about those opportunities, even if it's just calling up. It does a lot of things. You obviously get to know the individuals in other parts of the world. It enhances your global reach. And likely that individual will have you top of mind. And when something comes up, because he may learn about what your area of expertise is, you will be a top of mind. Now, I should emphasize, because there's many things I'm going to say that I have to caveat. Everything that you do as it relates to Mackrell, it should be run by the Mackrell delegate. Every Mackrell firm has a delegate or more. And they all tend to run things in a certain way, some protocol, and there's reasons for that. You need to have a good procedure when referrals come in, a good procedure to send out. And so please keep in mind that anything I'm commenting, you should be talking to the main delegate or delegates at your firm and going through those proper channels. So visiting these firms, business, social reasons, do it. Because the other aspect of that is when you go back to your firm and you tell your Mackrell delegate that you did visit so-and-so in such and such city, the next time there's either a meeting that he or she cannot attend, or the next time the meeting is closer to your city, where they're more inclined to bring more members from their firm because the expense is much lower, the more likely you'll be at front of mind. So don't underestimate that. Let your delegates know that you are interested and want to get more interested in the network, and let the others and there's nothing to prevent you from saying, you know what, I need to talk to a family lawyer in Europe, or I need to talk to a merger M&A guy in Texas. There's no reason why you can't pick up the phone. There's a lot of brain picking in this network, and that's the first stage of things turning into business. So if you need resources like that, do that. Pick up the phone. Ask to have a Zoom call. I've had people call me from all parts of the Mackrell network asking if they can borrow our room for a deposition. I've had a case with the firm in Australia, the Australian member at that time, whose son was going to school in Washington, D.C. He asked if I could meet his son, take him to lunch, and we spent a couple of hours together. That goes a long way on many levels. I don't think I need to explain that much more. But think out of the box. This is not just what's the law in a certain jurisdiction. This is really relationship building. Okay. Practice groups. I know that, in some way this is a group, the next generation group, but hopefully all of you know that there are practice groups within the network. I'm not sure what the number is, but there's at least 15 to 20 practice groups. Find out what those practice groups are. You can go on the Mackrell website and look to see what practice groups exist. Look to see who's running those groups. Send an email to them. Ask if you can join the next call. I was in there's a practice group. The strategies that we had to have this group put into place is so that junior lawyers, whether you're an associate or a partner, can participate. In fact, many of the delegates who are too busy to participate would love for you to help and participate. So take advantage of one or more practice groups. Get involved in that. The next time they have a matter that they need to refer, they may pick up the phone and call you. So it's a great opportunity. You're all obviously participating in next generation meetings, but are you actively connecting with each other in between meetings? It's very easy for people to have great meetings, great conferences, and great strategy sessions. But if you don't follow up and talk to these people and implement some of the ideas in between sessions, nothing really gets done. So my question to you all would be, after you meet Azim or you meet another lawyer from the Next Gen Network, are you following up and checking in? This is important to do as well. I would imagine as you get to know each other at this level, you will start to refer cases to each other. So junior lawyer to junior lawyer. There's nothing wrong with that. Keep in mind that all of you are antennas to the network, to your firm. So it's not just the delegate who can do this. We need the help of other lawyers from our firm to help reach out and create as many antennas as possible so that the referrals can be connected in so many different ways. Every firm is going to differ in terms of how they divide originations and responsibility. I don't want to get into that, but it does go back to my caveat, of course, about talking to your delegate about how those procedures are in place. So I don't even want to touch that part of it. The other aspect to Mackrell, which Keith and I are working on, and certainly Nigel and others, James Berry, for example, in Dubai, have worked on in the past, is the leveraging the network for corporate social responsibility opportunities. So we are a network of over 4,000 lawyers. We are all over the map. And so many years ago, we said, you know what, we need to leverage this for charitable purposes as well. And so Nigel's firm, for example, had a bike ride from London to Paris where they raised money for charity. Several people from my firm and other firms outside of the Mackrell delegate attended. So getting involved in these type of CSR events really events. You can do this. Nothing has to stop us from looking at the past. We can think of new ideas and opportunities. James Berry, who I mentioned a minute ago, he started an orphanage in Tanzania, Africa, and he got many of the Mackrell members involved in that. Nigel visited the network and others did as well. So, think outside the norm for Mackrell because the reach is far and wide. And there's a lot of leverage we have as a network. And I think charitable work is an important part of that. So let me I'll take questions certainly on any aspect of that. What I wanted to at least spend the next bit of time talking about were some career thoughts that I had. And again, there's nothing special that I've been doing other than putting in the time and being able to reflect back on some 28 years of practicing law. I wasn't always with Keller and Heckman. Like I said, I was with Keller and Heckman for 20 years. Before that, I was working on the criminal side as a prosecutor in the New York DA's office and the U.S. Attorney's office. So got some trial experience in and then moved to the private sector side. But over the course of those 28 years, you naturally learn a lot of things. So I'd like to share some things that I've given some thought to. Some will be apparent and some may not be. And some may be apparent, but there has to be a nuance to it. And I'll preface this by saying that not everything I'm about to say may work for you as an individual. It may not work for the firm in which you're in. But what I've tried to do is take the spirit of everything I'm about to say so that it can apply in your own way to your own circumstance at your firm. So the first, and this is in no particular order. The first thing I want to maybe at least tell you what I've done and had to have done is to reinvent yourself, and to reinvent yourself as often as you can. Now, there is a realism to that. You can't reinvent yourself every day, every week, nor should you. But looking back on my almost 30 years, I've had to do a refresh or reinvent almost every 5 years. And by the way, it's not necessarily a professional reinvent. It could be a personal. It could be, for me, I moved from one continent to the next, or I had to get involved in a different area of law that was outside my comfort zone. So I want to give a quick example of that, but I do think that reinventing yourself keeps you fresh, and it allows you to enjoy your career and not get stuck into one aspect of it. I'll get a little deeper into that in a minute, but by way of example, I've used this example many times with Azim on the line. Azim was involved with general, I think, FDA work. I'm not exactly sure what he did prior to Keller. I know he was with another firm because we interviewed him together. We had some interesting moments during that interview process. But we won't get into that now, but I can't see his face, but I'm sure he's smiling. He knows what happened during that meeting. But that was many years ago. I'm talking about well, we'll skip that for now. But Azim is a great example of someone who has reinvented himself. And he did that by walking through the mall near his home. He saw a kiosk where they were selling, at that time, e-cigarettes, tobacco-related type products in the middle of the mall. It was one of the first kiosks of a time. You really couldn't find too many of them. And Azim asked a lot of questions, got involved. And as an FDA lawyer, he looked at that and said, well, wait a minute, what type of product is this? How is this regulated? Is it a medical device? Is it a drug? What is it? Those were the basic questions he asked. And he was asking these questions before FDA even really knew anything about e-cigarettes. Those of you who are following it now, FDA has spent quite a bit of time. But Azim is a good example where he got in at the ground floor of that new technology, applying some of his FDA experience to a new area. And as a result of that, Azim is one of the experts in the United States on e-cigarettes. And he's often asked by regulatory authorities about his opinions, and has a massive client base and runs our e-cigarette, e-tobacco group in DC. And the last event we went to together, he had at least 15 partners in 15 different practice groups at that conference, where he's able to expand into other areas of law, the taxing of e-cigarettes, the transportation of e-cigarettes, the chemical control, you name it, he's expanded. So he's a perfect example of reinventing. From my personal standpoint, I've gone from being a criminal prosecutor to being a food lawyer. I specialized in food packaging for many years. Then I went into food safety on the food side. I went from a domestic lawyer to learning about individual countries writing some articles about certain laws in different countries. And in fact, I got a few clients in Japan at some point early on in my career because I was advising on certain aspects that some Japanese clients were interested in. That took me to Japan on a few occasions. And as a result of that, the partner who was working out of our Shanghai office observed that I was one of the few lawyers going to Asia, asked me to stop by the Shanghai office many years ago. And before you know it, he was asking if I can come out and help support the office. So lots of things can happen when you reinvent yourself. And I think that that should be something you're always thinking about. I also want to touch on the fact that I believe, looking back, there's sort of this lack of attention span, and we all see it now. Everyone's on their phone, everyone's on the computer, and there's a real sense of what can I do next? And I think that can play a role in different aspects of it. I do want to touch on the fact, and I'm certainly not saying this because I'm suggesting for a moment that anyone is thinking about jumping ship with their firm, but it's an observation that I've made over the years where a lot of people, young junior associates, will leave a firm to go to the next firm, and then they'll go to the next firm and the next firm. And sometimes there are reasons to leave a law firm, no question about that. But I can tell you, based on my experience and hindsight, a very large percentage of the time, that jump usually doesn't make things any better. In fact, what I would strongly push is this. I think that we're all working for really good law firms, and we all have really smart people surrounding us. And I think we all have a lot of resources in our own firms. And so I think you should, if you do feel like you need to do something maybe a little different or go beyond what you're doing now, think about the resources that you have at your own firm. Maybe, for example, you can do what Azim did and say, I want to open up a new practice group. And he was able to get the support from the firm. Now, you'll have to prove yourself, and I'll give you some ways that you can do that in a second. But you'd be amazed how receptive firms can be if you show interested in doing something different. So how could you do that? I'm going to give you something that worked really well for me. Again, when I was an associate, I would surf the internet and I would look for conferences. Didn't have to be in my city. In fact, in most cases, it was not. And I would look for these requests for proposals. So my area of expertise at that time was food packaging, and there's lots of conferences globally on food packaging. And I would literally surf the internet, and I would find where the next conference is, usually try to get 3-4 months out. And I would either look to see if they have a proposal and play what my area of expertise is, what my agenda would look like. And I can tell you, Keith?
Just make that point again. If you will just wind back like about 30 seconds and then carry on.
What I said was what I would do to try to get myself out there would be to surf the internet, to look for conferences that covered my area of interest and expertise. And so as a food package lawyer at that time, I would look beyond DC. I would look in other parts of America, other parts of the world, and respond to it. I built a template, which basically background who I am. It gave me an agenda, and of course, that would target the agenda based on what the conference is about. And I can tell you, without exaggeration, probably 85 to 95% of the time, that proposal was accepted. Now, sometimes that meant that I had to go to the management committee to ask for X number of dollars to send me. And sometimes you need to do that. And then you need to prove that sending you was worth their while. So obviously you want to work hard to try to bring back the client. But once you do that, once you get that first client, they're going to remember that because they're going to see your accomplish check where you met that client. And they're going to be more apt to saying, let's send that person to the next event. Other times, you could ask to pay for your travel expenses. Don't pay for your time. There's some lost leaders in everything we do as lawyers, particularly at the start of your career. But there's no reason you can say, you know what, pay for my hotel and airfare, and I will pay for the time it will take to prepare and present. You can go back to your firm and say, look, they're going to pay for X%. And that usually goes up quite well. Or you can, and again, obviously everything I'm saying would be if you have someone who's senior to you, make sure this is proper procedure. You can call up a client and say, look, I know that you have issues on X, Y, and Z. I want to come to your office and do a short presentation on X, Y, and Z. I did this in many parts of the world, and sometimes you can get cluster of clients in a particular city, and you can go to each of them and say, look, $500,000, you get 5 or 6 clients, and all of a sudden, they've paid your airfare and their expenses. And all of a sudden, they've seen you in person, and all of a sudden, you're at the front of their mind. So these things that just with today's technology are almost just so easy to do, but you gotta do it. And that's another point about marketing. I think marketing obviously is something that takes a lot of time. And I'm probably the folks on the phone on the call here who have been doing this for a long period of time will verify that sometimes a seed that you plant one day does not blossom for a year until years later. It could be, you could be lucky and it's months later, but it could be 5, 10. I've had cases where I gave my business card out 15 years prior and they kept it and they remembered. So planting those seeds now and planting a lot of them, because many of those seeds will not grow, but you've got to have a lot of seeds planted and you'll be surprised. It just takes 1 or 2 for that to start to generate on its own. So, how you can do that. Like I said, webinars now with technology, having a 1-hour call on with Zoom and putting some slides up on the screen. All of these things can be done. What I think is a good rule of thumb, and I've heard other people in the network talk about this, is having a touch. So if it's not every day, it should be once a week. You are reaching out and doing something on the marketing side. One touch. It could be following up with the client. It could be writing an article. It could be submitting a request to present somewhere, something that relates to marketing. The really good marketers, I will tell you, even if you just say 3 Sorry.
I mean,
How much did I?
it's set up brilliantly because it's when the really good marketers. So
Thank you for telling. The really good marketers will do it every day. They'll put out 1 or more touches every day that relates to marketing, that relates to developing their firm, that relates to developing the reputation of their firm. And when you do that and you show your expertise, your reputation. So when you think of subject matter A and firm B, will be connected to both. And so it's the best of both worlds. It's what your firm wants you to do, and it enhances your professional career. I want to touch a little bit on someone once, one of the senior partners at my firm once mentioned about marketing around the edges or the fringes. So what I mean by that is, take the FDA example. You may be practicing food and drug law, but you may find that there are areas that sort of scratch the outer edges of that expertise, of that area of practice. So again, with Azim, it's an easy example. He's a perfect example of marketing around the edges. He was a food and drug lawyer. He saw something new, something different. There was not much said about e-cigarettes, and he was able to develop the credibility to go from the middle of his expertise to the edges. And there's lots of different examples of that that you should keep in mind. So in other words, the point I want you to take in here is you don't have to reinvent yourself to the point where you're necessarily coming up or having to learn a whole new area of practice, but it may be something that logically flows. And I think in today's world, with the practice of law changing, there are so many different new and exciting areas to at least keep your eye on, whether you're talking about e-cigarettes, whether you're talking about cannabis, I can tell you in the last 6 months, I've been getting heavily involved in plant-based foods and cell-based meats. This is something that was triggered from a client who had a question about plant-based foods. I didn't know much about it. And now you can see, for example, these plant-based foods in Burger King, high-end restaurants. And guess what? There's lots of regulations that apply to these new products. I was at an event, I mentioned this on LinkedIn, where we were talking about plant-based and cell-based, and we're seeing technology where they're taking the cell of a pig and they're developing bacon or a pork patty from the cell completely in the laboratory. So I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's gotta be some safety issues to discuss. There has to be some regulations to address. And so I started writing an article on plant-based foods. I started looking out for those conferences. And within 6 months, I'm now able to say comments about this because I can tell you my experiences, and you get on panels with other people, you learn about different aspects to this. And so it's a great way to reinvent yourself and not go too far outside your comfort zone. You can look at, things like A&I. There's going to be a lot of things coming down that pathway. Someone called me and Azim not too long, about a year ago, 2 years ago, about drones. We're all seeing now drones entering airspace. Well, guess what? There are regulations to make sure those drones are not flown too high in the air. So you start to see articles written about and people coming to you because they've seen one article. You don't need to have 5, 10, 15 years of experience in anything I'm talking about, but you can become well-versed and knowledgeable to the point where if no one else knows it, you know what? You may as well be the first to learn it because you may very well be. And when you are the first and you get at that ground floor, you start to connect that subject matter with your name, with your firm's name. And again, it's a win-win. Just a few more points and then I'll open up for questions. Very quick ones. Being responsive. This is something that is very, very high on my list. It may sound very obvious, but believe it or not, it's not so obvious. I see associates every time not doing the simple thing, which is saying to me, you know what, I need more time to get back to that client's inquiry. Well, you know what? Tell the client that. Tell the client you received the email, you're giving it thought, and you'll get back to him. And guess what? If you can't get back to him when you say you're going to get back to him or her, write him another email saying, I know I said Tuesday, just need a little more time. Here's why. Clients love that. What they don't love is if you ignore it. And not just being responsive to clients, being responsive to your firm and the people at your firm. That could be from office services up to the senior most partner. Being responsive, letting them know that you care and that when they send you an email, you're prepared. That's going to continue to develop a reputation that you want to have. Be kind and generous. I know that sounds goofy, but that's something that came to mind. The more you give back to people, and in our world, many times it could be related to sharing responsibility or sharing originations. You'd be amazed that if you show early on that you're generous and you split things or you refer to other practice areas in your firm, people will then do the same for you. So being generous and kind is important. I'm almost done. So how much of that did you lose?
Practice areas of your firm.
We'll move on, because I lost the thought. But the point is, be kind and be generous. I want to just finish up with maybe 1 or 2 quick points. Honing your skills. This is something we all have to do. This could be, taking courses like Dale Carnegie, public speaking, out there and speak to clients, speak to prospective clients. So asking your firm if you can take a writing class or a public speaking class. I would imagine if you get a group of people together at your firm, they're going to be very interested in supporting you. And you may have heard Mackrell is already starting to get involved in that area where we can help train young lawyers. There'll be more heard about that. But don't be afraid to go to the powers that be at your firm and say, hey, there's 10 of us, there's 20 of us who want to take a speaking class or a writing class. So honing your skills is really, really important. Using good judgment. I hate to say use great judgment or use good judgment. And I used to say that if you don't have likely difficult you to learn judgment. But I'm going to assume that everyone is using good judgment because they are working with reputable firms, but maintain that good judgment. And if you're in doubt, talk to somebody more senior. So in other words, should you send that email out? Maybe you're debating. If you're debating and thinking you shouldn't send it out, probably you shouldn't send it out. Sleep on it. Run it by somebody else, because that one email may spiral out of control and all of a sudden you find yourself in a jam. If you don't know what legal advice to give a client on the phone, I always tell clients that a good lawyer never gives advice off the top of his head. You need time to and I'm sure some of your folks on this
you need time.
You need time to think about it. You'll get back to them. Answering off the top of your head and you're not sure it's the right answer can get you in more trouble. So judgment calls like this, take a pause, hit the pause button, and talk to people and get their feedback. My final one, this is an opportunity I have during this hour to give back in a very small way. I'm hoping that one or two things that I've said will stick and that you'll apply some of these things in your own way. And I'm hoping, more importantly, that as you progress in your career, that you continue to give back and look down and say to those junior lawyers, let me help you the way I was helped. And as far as your mentors are concerned, since this is a sort of mentoring workshop, if you will, I want to leave you with the final point, which is this. I have a lot of mentors in my life, personal and professional. And you'll find yourself saying, this person is my mentor. You may find yourself also saying, I don't like something that it could be whatever. It could be his organization skills. It could be anything you can think of. That's okay. What I think you should do is try to take the best from many mentors. Don't lock into one mentor. Learn and take the best from each one. And together with all of those skills that you enjoy practicing, you will probably become one day a better mentor than they were to you, and you'll be able to pass that information to people who are moving up the ranks. So that's sort of my overview, but open to questions. Hopefully too much of it wasn't chopped up by the connection, but I think, Keith, you stopped me when it did. So thank you. Thank you for your attention.
David, thanks a million for that. Thanks for the insight. A lot of common sense. I'm gonna we have some next generation leaders on this call. So I'm going to ask you, when you're asking a question, you can switch your videos on if you like. But when you're asking a question, if you pop your video on, that'd be really helpful. I have a question to start off with, which is, I mean, we're skimming 40 minutes to encapsulate as much common sense as you can and a full legal career. Although I say full, there's a long way to go yet. Sometimes I found with some of the people that I mentor, they've challenged and said, we see these phenomenal steps, these successes. You've talked about how you've reinvented yourself. You've talked about how you've gone to your seniors in the past and asked to go to a conference and then picked up a client and gone back. Wow, that's all great. It sometimes feels a bit intimidating. It's like you've been on this path where things have only gone right. Where have things happened where it hasn't gone right and you've had to adjust, or you've learned from it, or one of your mentors or seniors has gone, I backed you, David. That didn't work out. That's not a problem. What I need you to think about is X. I think that would be useful to hear as well.
Yeah, I think probably where there could be a breakdown, and I don't think whether it's my experience or anyone who's on the line now is probably related to a breakdown in communication. So in other words, there's no ill intent to do anything or circumvent anyone, but sometimes by sheer excitement because you want to do something, you want to try something different, there could be a breakdown in communication, and someone will say, "Well, gee, I didn't know you were going to that event," or "I went to the event and all of a sudden I'm getting a call for a new matter, and unbeknownst to me, that person was already involved with someone else at the firm." And so this is inevitable. I think those are problems that demonstrate that at least you're putting yourself out there. If we were all sitting at our desk and doing nothing in our own world, you're never going to have these potential breaches, if you will. But I think that as long as you're showing good intent behind that, and you sit down with the person and say, "Look, I didn't realize, here's how I ended up there. Here's why he called me," and work it out. This goes to being generous. You may need to split it, or you may need to say, "Sorry, I didn't realize." And the worst thing you want to do is say sorry, pound your fist at the table. "I got it. It's mine." So breakdown in communication, but you can rectify it cordially and appropriately with a little bit of skill.
Any questions from the group?
Hey, David, this is Azim.
Hey, buddy.
Can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
So one thing that I thought, one way that you sort of ventured out there that I think really shows your willingness to take on risks and new ideas and new things was your move to Shanghai. Could you talk a little bit more about, what went through your mind when the opportunity came up? How did you decide that that was going to be the best move, not only professionally, but for your family with your 3 kids?
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that I think, young lawyers can, if you're looking for adventures and new opportunities, that was certainly one thing that you made good use of.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Azim. It doesn't happen too often that someone sits you down one day over lunch and says, "Do you want to move to China?" And at that point, when I was asked that question, I had never been to China. And so this is obviously going to be very subjective. Some people would say thanks, but no thanks. In fact, I would submit that probably a very high percentage would either say it doesn't work for me or it doesn't work for my family. For me, it did work. It was at a point in my career where I was really looking for a change. I had been in Europe working for Keller and Heckman. I came back. I was back for at least 5 years at the time. And I have this international bug, which is why networks like Mackrell intrigue me. And so when the opportunity came along, look, there were challenges to that. And I think the biggest challenge that I'm experiencing even now is while I have my 3 kids here with me, my family, my mom and all of my extended family is in other parts of the world that's very difficult to get to. I'm in a position right now, as a matter of fact, where we cannot leave China unless we're willing to give up our visa. If we leave the borders of China, our visa is gone and we would be back in a very long queue and just simply cannot do that. So I have a sense of uneasiness now that if, God forbid, I had to get back, I could not, or I'd have to make a very difficult decision. So my example may be extreme, but I think that there are, if you are already a part of this network and you're on this call or engaged in some way with Mackrell, I'm going to bet chances are you're a little bit more like me and you like change, you want to explore. And so I would just say, be open-minded, try something. If it doesn't work, you can fix it. You can tie conditions to it. Let me try it for 6 months. So everyone's going to be different based on for you. I think the most difficult thing is if you don't try it, you're not going to potentially find yourself going down a path that I never thought. If you told me I would be speaking even an ounce of Mandarin 7 years ago, when I took 5 years of Spanish and cannot speak a word, I'd say you're crazy. But here I am, getting myself in trouble in taxis and restaurants speaking what I think is Mandarin. But it's opened up my life to such a way that I never thought at this stage I would have. So that's one couple of thoughts on that. Be open-minded.
Any other questions? If not, I have a question for you, Azim. Okay, Natalie, go.
Oh, sorry, I had to flash up on screen. So the question I was going to ask is, because I appreciate that sort of like American firms and obviously like within the UK, I think they've all embraced marketing. Like our marketing and yours is obviously very big projects. We've recruited people and so on. But I appreciate like when I speak to obviously some of our European counterparts, they don't have as much as that, and it's just not something that firms have really embraced as much. So I think from a young lawyer's point of view, and I probably very fortunate can take myself out because obviously Nigel and our firm push, if we ask for something, you don't tend to get too many barriers up. But sort of the advice for the young lawyers, if they feel that they're asking for things because they're seeing maybe what the UK and America are doing and would like something similar, sort of, is there any way like within MI that maybe that could help them with a bit of BD? I mean, with like, for instance, the practice groups, I would probably, as you said, push for people to join that because it's a really easy way. Like, we're going to be setting up webinars and that. So I just know if you just wanted to maybe touch upon other ways within MI, if the young lawyers are finding that maybe marketing is not embraced as much, what they could do via MI to sort of maybe on like a free platform have that marketing support.
So Natalie, are you asking that question from the standpoint that although your firm is heavily into marketing, as you say, you're having conversations with other younger lawyers and other firms where marketing is not top of mind, it's not financed, if you will, and that is somehow putting a damper on you working together to market? Is that
yeah, and I think it's, yeah, and I just sort of, I mean, it's supposed to be a you because it's more senior, but just sort of highlighting, that's it, sort of highlighting to the younger lawyers how they can use MI as a marketing platform if they're finding that maybe within their sort of own country and culture it's not as sort of embedded into the like the legal profession as it is within MI.
Yeah, so I agree with you. I've worked with lots of firms in Europe and with people in my generation and older. And in many cases, there is this mentality that they don't need to market, or they just don't have the resources or other reasons. I've had someone say to me, "We don't market at my firm." That's been an actual quote. And so I think the good news is that's not your generation anymore. You are, sort of the okay boomer generation for those of you who follow that politics. And so my point is there's a lot more chance of you being able to convince your colleagues of your generation and marketing is something they should do. So so you don't have to convince that that's the first hurdle. Sounds like you don't have that problem. What you have is having those young lawyers convince their own firms that they need resources. And so I think what you do in a case like that is put a concrete example situation in front of them. So by concrete, I mean, come up with a concept, whether it's you're going to have a webinar, whether you're going to have a breakfast session. Europe everyone's pretty close together. It's once COVID ends, it's not that difficult to all meet in a city that's in the center and invite the lawyers and say, look, here's what the young lawyers have decided to do. We've invited X number of clients. So put the question to that lawyer. And I guarantee you in most cases, they're going to say, give it a shot. And then do your best to deliver something. And once you deliver something, the likelihood of them saying yes again is high. As it relates to Mackrell, of course, we have a marketing budget, business development budget. And if the young lawyers come to Keith or me or others on the IC and have an idea that we can help subsidize, we absolutely would do that. Point in case, we're starting the women's network. Keith, I don't know if you've introduced that concept to this group, but that's where we're going to see a lot of women getting together and coming up with different programs. Probably Keith a lot more on that. We discussed that the other day, where other leaders will be participating from outside the network. So getting involved in the women's network, I don't see why you could not. I don't think there's any restrictions other than the fact that you need to be a woman. So I think it's just a question of looking to see what we're offering and asking questions and how we can help. And we will be supportive 9 times out of 10.
I would add to that, actually, Natalie, and pick up on something that David said earlier on, which is there are smaller firms in our network that don't have the marketing budgets. And in small pockets, there are still some of those boomers, perhaps, who are not supportive. By becoming involved in a next generation group, in these groups, you start building your network. Start regionally. You start to get to know the people in your region, start making those connections, start meeting and connecting outside of the meetings themselves, because that's something else that David talked about that is fundamental. Don't just come along to one of these or your next generation regional meeting and go, wow, that was really great, and disappear. Get hold of the people, say hello, say where you're from, connect with somebody because they said something interesting or quirky or challenging, and start to build a relationship. And through that, you will start building not just the foundations for future relationships, but also your profile. Similarly, the practice groups. The practice groups, don't be afraid of them. They are split even at senior lawyer level between experts and people who are interested. So come along and listen. You very often, the fact that you're a lawyer means you are bright. It means that you've got something to add and offer and say. And therefore, on a practice group, on some of the practice groups discussions, some of the ones that are starting to build momentum, it isn't just the old war horses who are holding court. There are people chipping in from around the practice group, and that gives you a sense of A, what's going on, and B, how you can contribute and add to it. And again, that's building a profile. That's not marketing in its truest sense, but it is starting to build a network and starting to build a sense of you and your firm by connecting and engaging, which is an element of marketing. So as a lot of what David's talked about is being proactive as a lawyer, these are ways that Mackrell International helps you facilitate that. Always, it's about being active and not passive.
And can I just add one more thing to that? In the age of COVID, right, this idea of marketing budgets, I think, is totally being revamped. There's so much you can do from home. We're on a Zoom call right now with people from all over the world connecting. You can do so much sitting at home through social media, through WhatsApp. I'm in several Mackrell WhatsApp groups, where we're always chatting and talking about business opportunities, hosting webinars, hosting these types of Zoom calls, reaching out to clients. Everyone does Zoom meetings or video conferencing now. So David mentioned a good point. Doing those sort of when you're marketing, making a goal of having a touch a day or a few touches a week. You can have, that's so much easier now with social media, with the tools that we have. So one thing we're going to talk about at the Next Gen meeting next week for the Americas is how to use the current pandemic situation to your advantage, how to use the tools that you have, technology, social media, to market and to build your practice, particularly as young lawyers. So you don't necessarily need to have huge budgets to do that.
Yep.
Very good point.
Any other questions? One thing I'll add to that is that it's very important for you to let everyone else know what you do. There are so many people who've been connected for years in this network, and to this day, they still don't know what area of practice they have. So it's really important every opportunity you can get is to tell people what you do and what your practice area is. And if I, never thought this would happen, but while we're on this call, someone on this call with me who will remain nameless unless he or she wants me to name them, just referred a case to me because they know what I do. So I never thought during this hour I'd get a case, but it's because they know I practice in certain areas. And so, and I'm front of mind, I'm right there on the screen. So there's countless examples of this, and it may go nowhere, but it's another seed. And so it's really important to constantly put yourself out there.
So we could talk for a lot longer, but I'm conscious we're at the top of the hour. I think the final thing I would say before saying a big thank you to David is Nigel and Greg, you're up pretty soon, I'm sure. But is for all the next generation lawyers, if you don't know who your Mackrell International delegate is, and the fact that you're here means you probably do, a lot of communication goes out to the MI key contacts. Make sure that you're checking in with them every now and then to find out what's going on. If something is specific to next generation, it will come out to our next generation list. But otherwise, there are things that are going on. So make sure you're proactive about saying, hey, anything going on with Mackrell International, any webinars, any roundtables that could be useful for me to get involved in and build the profile of our practice area, sector area, expertise area. So it's doing that because Mackrell International provides that platform. Making sure as much as you can, you engage with the next generation meetings, because that will start building your network and giving you some ideas for coming up with webinars and other things. Picking up on what some of the more senior next generation lawyers or the more experienced ones, people like Azim, who's been leading next generation in the Americas for some time. People like Natalie, who's now up for awards in October, embarrassing her there, is starting to learn from others around the network, and probably finding that a lot of the stuff, you're doing a lot of the stuff. So it corroborates your own actions, but gives you some ideas. So engage and involve yourself as much as possible. And, don't let things like budget be an obstacle. That's, if you want something to happen, you'll find an excuse to make it happen. If you don't, you'll find an excuse not to make it happen. It's that simple. So, and yeah, very much connect with Mackrell International social media to see what we're doing and comment. If you think we're saying something that's not enough or boring, or you've got something to add to it, comment, get involved. That's what we're here for. But David, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your insight. I'm delighted you've got, people are giving you more work already. See this as a starting point, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us very early and very late. And look out for future monthly mentor series and other next generation meetings. Once again, David, thanks a million.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening.
Stay safe, everybody, and take care.